following up Dr. Healy's like batting after Chipper Jones in high school. So try to do my best. My name is Ryan Reinsel. I'm VP of Innovation for Baseball Cloud and Yakkertech. Today I'll be talking about quantifying in-game command, where observed data meets intended location. So what I want to do is provide context here on what's happened in the past regarding analyzing and trying to find command metrics, looking at what we can presently do, and then future research as well. So context for command, right? We've had over the last decade different ways to evaluate pitchers off ball tracking data, looking at not only pitch data, but batted ball events, keeping it out of the middle, right? Living on the edge, getting called strikes. Where can we go from here? So if we look at the past couple of years, we've seen some really great articles and metrics like Command Plus from Eno and Stats, edge percentage with Bill Petty. Baseball Prospectus did a great job with CSAA and called strike probability and command scores. Eli worked on swinging strike command. And so, there's good visuals here of control and command. And we did the best that we could without having the actual data from where that pitch was. And Max Scherzer actually, I think, did a quote a couple of years ago talking about you can't be inside the pitcher's head. We're now inside the pitcher's hat, so we're pretty close. So how do we actually capture intended location and work it into a new command environment? With PitchCom's on-field technology, we can know the intended pitch type and intended pitch location, give that an XY coordinate, and then with the Yakkertech's observed location, we're able to measure those distances and start to get into some fun analysis when it comes to command. So looking at the yellow, that would be the pitcher's intended location. That's given every pitch that can now be saved, stored, and synced with actual ball tracking data, which would be green. So you can see in this example, we're 13 inches between the intended location and actual location of the pitch. What gets interesting here is we can start to quantify command off pitch type, bring in batter handedness, game state situations. So a fastball up and in against a righty and a lefty could have different coordinates that we can then measure against. So some high level concepts for command. Here's the average exit velo for last year on four-seam fastballs against right-handed hitters coming from right-handed pitchers. And then you can see the frequency. So if you look on the heat map on the right and multiply that by 10, that middle 216, it's a lot of pitches in the middle of the zone. And you look at on the left, average exit velocity is 96 miles an hour. So we know keep it out of the middle of the zone. What we don't know is how many of those pitches were intended there, hopefully not a lot, but also how many pitches ran back into the middle. So we can also look at across the zone diagonally, how exit velocity stays pretty consistent within a mile an hour. And then up top, inside to a righty, that 116 times 10. All right. And then on the left, the 86 miles an hour average exit velocity, a 10 mile an hour difference on exit velocity, right? From one spot to the next. So we know that there's differences here in location. We need to be able to quantify it. Here's Sandy's 2022 data against righties and lefties per pitch type. I just wanted to bring this up. We don't have his command data yet, but when you look at these different pitches, you start to get an idea of the planes of which they're being thrown on. So when you start looking at his torso rotational plane, do those pitches match up? And you can start to see where his locations are across the zone. So we could theorize that if your pitch profiles and movement shapes match your plane of rotation from your delivery standpoint, your command could be better. What happens a lot is you might see a pitch arsenal where the fastball kind of jumps up with a higher arm slot. The guy might have worse command. Same thing with the curveball. If we look here at his changeups, we can see how many he threw on the top left, average exit velocity against. And then those were his changeups. And I took that kind of middle or that inside edge on those changeups. And that was a swing percent of over 87%. strike rate about 37%. WOBA was 0.66 and a batting average of 53 points. So there's a good idea of where he was trying to throw that. His fastballs were primarily up and in on the zone. So now we can start to look at where were those locations intended and how does the arsenal play together. So let's go into some theoretical analysis here. New data, new models. We know what a movement plot looks like. Can we add miss distance and direction? So we're familiar with, say, fastball, changeup, curveball, slider, movement plot here. Now with black arrows being spin direction, we can then look at the red arrows being average, or for the fastball, red arrows being average misdirection, and color-coded accordingly. So if you see here, the fastball, he usually misses up and a little bit to the right off of the spin direction. That changeup tends to miss arm side here for this right-handed pitcher. The slider, he pulls a lot down and away. The curveball there, as an example, he starts to miss his location by a good amount, and he misses it above his intended location. We can then start to look at arm slot and how his pitches move relative to his arm slot, what's expected, what's not, and then be able to quantify command and location from a movement plot standpoint. What we can also do is start to look at some potential metrics. If you look at this graph, this could be a pitcher that tends to miss low and away arm side. For any pitching coaches in the room, you can look at a guy that tends to miss. It's going to be kind of that low and away and maybe up and in that matches his plane. And then you can look at his delivery and get an idea why. We can also talk about accuracy and precision. So defining a pitcher's margin of error was a great tidbit that John Hendricks gave me. And when we look at accuracy and precision, we can look at accuracy in terms of how close to that intended location center, and precision being how close to each other. So you may have a pitcher that actually has a lot of precision. He just continues to miss his spot. So maybe he's commanding his shape profile for his pitch, but he's not actually executing where he wants to throw that. We can look at potential metrics like precision index and execution rate, just number of hit spots. We can also look here and a fastball up and in, we can start to give different concentric circles. So green being an absolute hit spot, start to expand that to yellow and red. These are some different ways that we can start to look and quantify high execution, low execution, general hit spot scores. You can see that we color coded this based off those red pitches that get to the middle of the zone. There's probably a good chance that those are higher exit velocity, as we saw earlier. And so we can bring in heat maps inside of our intended targets. And those target and circles, they may change shape, they may change size based off of pitch type, based off of batter handedness, and other factors that we can account for. Can also look at execution and mistakes. So potential metrics like missed barrel location ratio, pitch mistake value, how often are we able to hit our spots and dominate that? So when we call a fastball up and in and he hits it, do we get the result that we want? We can look here, corrective miss distance, offsetting the X and Y, leveraging location and pitch characteristics for new aimed location as well. So once we know where you're missing and what your shape profile looks like, being able to suggest where that pitcher should start that pitch after understanding his shape. And one of the great things that Clay said earlier from the MLB presentation was weather's always played a factor. We just haven't been able to measure it. Same thing with command. We can also look at not only can you command your location, but can you command your full pitch profile? So a lot of times pitchers may try to be hitting a spot, but their shape, their velo, their spin, their direction changes across the zone. Here's a great example of a Division I SEC Saturday starting pitcher this year. These are curveballs only. Average velo across the zone stays pretty consistent. His spin rate, his tilt, and his efficiency, which you really can see a lot of variance on, is staying consistent in the mid 70s there. Break and induced vertical break will match that as well. And so could be a reason why he's a Saturday starter in the SEC. But also this is maybe a candidate that we can do some deeper exploration with because he can command his shape. So we can maybe give him a different sort of score or grade and evaluation regarding intended location and being able to quantify command. From there, in sort of an order of operations, if we can command shape, can we start looking at sequencing? Are we able to work back to back to back and change different command values? So if I go fastball, curveball, fastball, does my sequencing help or hurt my command? Does it change my delivery where I can no longer get to that outside corner after throwing a couple off-speed pitches? So we can look at relationships with misses, considering full pitch path recognition, and start to look and understand patterns. We can see here, first pitch, what's being thrown, how often do we hit our spots, average, or after the fastball, after curveball, obviously in count and game state situations. What happens with leverage counts, 2 strikes, how often are we hitting our spots? And are we executing where we want to throw? And are we executing from an amateur level? A lot of times what happens is you're trying to throw strikes. At the professional level, you're trying to execute a ball. We're not necessarily looking for swinging strikes all the time. We need weak contact. We need to get outs. We need to win baseball games. We need to make some money. So if we're able to go through that order of operations, we can command our shape, we can sequence appropriately without losing command. Then can we look at tunneling? Being able to measure these distances between pitches in 2D and 3D space. We can then start to say, okay, is this pitcher able to say command a fastball up and in, a changeup down and in, and a slider away? And then start to look and understand, okay, how is that affecting the hitter's timing? Are we taking away shape, time, and distance from that hitter? And being able to quantify that with command, sequencing, and tunneling together. We can also look here at aimed location. So we talked about being able to quantify the intended location and actual location that's observed in game. And what gets interesting here on the bottom left is this would be a pitcher that's a left-handed pitcher. He's got a fastball that rides, but when he tries to go and hit that yellow spot up and away from a right-handed hitter, he tends to miss way arm side. It's a non-competitive pitch. So where is the next best spot to get weak contact or swings and misses aside from the yellow? That would be up and into the righty, which is shown there with the red ball. So yellow is the one spot that we want, and we'll call the red the 1A spot. When we go yellow, we miss big time. So if we have this pitcher throw up and in and try to hit red, and he executes hitting that red location, that's still a good spot to hit. But what if when he tries to go red, he misses back into yellow? We can now look at that, understand the distances, and from a coaching aspect, we're able to start to understand where players miss, understand that distance and direction, and then look at how that actually affects batted ball results. So some practical application. How do we view command through different lenses? Let's start looking at pitcher evaluation. So we can go into, from a high level, game scores, looking at leverage, pressure situations, 2 strikes. For this graph here, just looking at the last 7 games, understanding what we can consider sort of a league average, create some different metrics here from a scoring standpoint, and then risk management. And when you think about risk management, when you're talking about pitch location, we want to throw low risk, high reward pitches. So where is that? If we can overlay a run value heat map and then be able to pitch to certain zones, then we have a better chance of, say, getting that high fastball that may induce a higher swing percentage and a higher swing and miss percentage without getting a high exit velocity. So we've been able to do that in the past, but now we have specific locations and an ability to quantify exactly where that is. So adding risk management and margin of error into something like a game score could be interesting. You can also look at projections. So having this at the college level, from a draft standpoint, looking at this from the minor league level on how to get to the big leagues, we can look here and say, okay, what's the trade-off between command and just stuff, right? Lately, in the last couple of years, pitch design is more velo, right, and bigger movement. Not always the case. When we look here, maybe it's fastball command. If you have it, can you command your whole arsenal? If so, can you sequence well, right? If you can't command the fastball, do you have stuff that plays, right? And can you start to incorporate something like a seam shifted wake effect to your pitches to get later movement, sharper breaks, potentially higher swing and miss or weak contact. Looking at how this transfers from bullpens to game and adjusting pitch design accordingly, I think is a frontier that we're excited to explore. Can also look here at comparing. So once we have data across a conference or a league, being able to just look at something like a seasonal execution rate comparison between two pitchers. So when you see here, pitcher in blue, he can get up there in terms of executing his spots. And we may see that pitchers are 30% is really good for hitting their spots, right? I think inside edge has 11 or 12 inches in terms of missed location on average, using some different methods. With red being maybe a pitcher that's more consistent, but a little bit lower. Who do you want on the mound, right? In the big game. All right. And how does that change throughout the course of a season? Bringing in something like intrinsic pitch values from Glenn and the relationship with existing stats allows us to compare pitcher to pitcher. Lastly, we can look at fatigue. So how is fatigue affecting command? How can we measure it? What's it look like across execution rate throughout the course of a game? Example here, right? It tends to go down throughout the course of the game. We can start to filter that by pitch type, right? By batter handedness, by counts and situations. And then looking at pitch profiles as well. On the bottom right, you'll see that this is a spin rate across the course of the game. And it was really going down for this pitcher here on his fastballs. So how does his pitch profile and his metrics start to play into fatigue when it comes to command? Slots can start to drop, legs start to get a little bit heavy. That's going to change release point dispersion. That could ultimately end up changing command or what that pitcher thinks he's throwing. If he knows what his average pitch looks like from a fastball movement standpoint, and later in the game, his slot drops and his spin direction changes, he may be throwing a pitch that's different than what he has in his mind. So that's the future research. What's the future research look like? Arsenal simulation. So let's get into pitch model optimization. All right, we talked about modern pitch design is better stuff. It's really about using your stuff better. So using Dr. Healy's seam shifted awake model, we can now create real-time immersive simulations for full arsenal optimization and transition that from bullpens and labs and games to quantify command using newly designed pitches. Knowing what you want before you step on the field or in the pen, and then breaking those out and understanding what pitchers are able to maximize seam shifted wake effects through Dr. Healy's model, understanding how that can play into location for guys that can command it, and then looking at the ability to tunnel effectively and steal timing away from the hitter. We'll also look at effective velocity with Perry Husband. There's different types of pitches there in his ecosystem with strikes, pressure, and freeze pitches. This is an image from a pitcher's point of view of fastball up and in, change up, down and in, and breaking ball low and away. You can see the diagonal line there inside the circles. So those pitches that may be closer to the hitter can have a higher effective velocity, stealing time away from that swing path, which MLB is able to really dive into from their earlier presentation. So timing per location, miss per location starts to get really fun to analyze. Can also look at in-game biomechanics with our good friends over at Kinetrax. We can start to pair up command data that we're capturing with biomechanics data and see what correlations there are and how that affects movement, shape, command. There was a study done in 2021 by ASMI with a team of people there, Dr. Glenn Fleissig, looking at the relationship between variability in baseball pitching kinematics and consistency in pitch location. They looked at the standard deviation among fastballs thrown. And so what they defined consistency as was finding the mean pitch location, the distance from each pitch location to the mean, and then averaging those distances. The results, the model explained about a 58% variance. And so you can see upper trunk tilt, shoulder abduction, shoulder horizontal abduction, external rotation of the shoulder, and shoulder horizontal adduction played a part there in trying to look at how the kinematics of the pitching delivery started to correlate to the ability to hit pitch locations. It's interesting here, everything's upper body, and a lot has to do with the trunk and the shoulder, which may work into plane of rotation. Lastly, we can look at pitch grips. So being able to automate the ability to capture grips on every pitch relative to seam orientation with something like Kinetrak's hand model. We can then look at pens and games, finding distances between fingers. The grip, and as the ball releases, that's the last part of the body to touch that pitch and touch the ball. That's how energy is transferred. So it's a really exciting time to explore how grips, how body movement, how ball flight can all work into quantifying command as well. I'd like to thank SABR for the opportunity here, Baseball Pod, Yakkertech, and our Acuity team, PitchCom with John Hankins, who's here, Dr. Glenn Healy, and a number of great friends here that helped with this presentation. Good for questions if anyone has any.
Some pitchers have some higher variability game to game in their command. I was wondering if you looked into a game that stabilizes, that there was more movement loss to the manager go with the plan and say, I'm going to know by that over 7 or 8 whether he's got a good 7 day and move on that.
Yeah, that's a great question, asking kind of when does command stabilize there for high variability pitchers. That's something that we're excited to explore. Yeah, I think that's a great, I think where command can really play is into that profile of that pitcher from a coaching standpoint and understanding when he needs to go out there, what we're kind of expecting from a command standpoint, and definitely pitch by pitch. What's sort of the post pregame bullpen conversation look like? You know, you have your stuff and it stinks in game, right? It stinks in the bullpen and it's great in game. Now we can start to quantify that a little bit better and having a better idea and expectations of what we're able to assume from this pitcher going into a game.
What is the rationale for defining the intended location based on where the pitches are actually ending up from a particular pitcher?
So PitchCom's able to translate exactly where that pitch is. So the pitcher and the catcher are, and everyone else on the field is able to get fastball high inside. We're then able to take that data and pair that with an XY coordinate. Then we'll know the observed location with an XY coordinate, find the Euclidean distance.
Observed location, intended location, isn't that which you showed the tic-tac-toe grid? Mm-hmm. Which box of the tic-tac-toe grid the pitcher was?
We're able to understand and know that spot exactly based off of the PitchCom data, which is what the pitcher's hearing. So he's able to hear fastball high inside, so we know he's throwing it there.
So you get feedback in effect from the pitcher's brain in order to get an intended location.
We know the intended location of the pitch and the actual location of the pitch.
Right, because the pitcher told us where he's trying to throw.
Correct.
Maybe let me ask the question a little differently. With what precision do you know the intended location?
Sure. So we can look at precision from a couple of different ways. From a general standpoint, we could just go zone by zone. We can also look at actually having the pitcher plot before the game or beforehand where each pitch type and each location per batter and game state he wants to throw that pitch. So the actual XY location of a fastball high and inside may change righty versus lefty, righty with an 0-2 count versus a 2-0 count. And then we can start looking at those distances between.
Pitcher that usually has pretty good command from the metrics that you have. Is this a predictor of possible injury in the future when a pitcher loses that command in a game?
I think looking at how command starts to suffer across the course of the game and looking at fatigue, I think, and with biomechanics data in game at the major league or college level, especially with Kinetrak's in game now, we can certainly start to do a lot of analysis with injury prevention and prediction across the course of a game and across the course of the season. Great. Thank you.